Today we have a really cool meetup scheduled here with Kiran. He's going to do sort of an Ask Me Anything type of format. We'll start with some of the questions that were submitted by folks to our Twitter and to us directly via email, and then we'll jump into all of your questions. So I think the way this can work is if you have questions already in mind, or if you think of them during this meetup, just post them to the chat. And make sure your name is visible. I think it is by default. And when we get to the audience question section, then we'll just call on you. Then unmute and ask away. From there, then I'm gonna pass it over to James, who's gonna kick this off.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Kiran, I think we're one away from a record here. I think I remember 46 in the last group. So I think I just wanted to stress how much of a treat it is to have Kiran here. I've obviously am a self-professed energy nerd and have had a lot of conversations with you, with a lot of different folks, and there are few I enjoy more than those I have with Kiran. I think he's really not only leads one of the coolest companies in the space, but is also, one of the sort of leading thinkers in the space when you really start digging into all the different aspects of DER's, energy, what the clean energy goals. So I'm just going to mute everyone here, actually. Yeah, it's just a real pleasure to have him here. Kiran, thanks for your time. I figured I'd let you start with a bit of an intro about yourself and about Arcadia, and then we could maybe any topics you want to touch on just right out the gate. But then we can move into some questions that we have for you and kind of keep the conversation going from there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. I was supposed to be with you guys in New York back in March, literally. I remember asking my wife, should I go to New York? And it was the day of the meetup. So finally we got to do this. This is great. I feel like you guys are my people. So it's good it'll be great to do this Q&A and definitely afterward. I think what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about, and by the way, I'm coming to you from my basement. For those that didn't hear, I actually conveniently moved my desk behind my home's newest DER, and a electric water heater with a controllable switch on it. My thermal battery, as I like to call it in my home. So guys, what I guess I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about Arcadia, what we're building, what I think customers actually want. It sounds like you guys really focus a lot on commercial industrial, and so I'll talk purely about the residential experience, which is where we 100% focus. Talk a bit about the products in the home and how you can monetize them. It is not a packetized energy unit, although that company is great. It's actually an Aquanta. I see this in the chat, so I just want to let folks know. Packetized is doing great work as well. Cool. So who are we? So when I think about, when I started the company, one of the big things I wanted, that I thought the utilities role should be, is to be an electrification platform. There's a ton of data that exists within everyone's energy account. There's the customer relationship, and there's the thing that a lot of folks don't spend a lot of time on, and I think is uniquely the thing we have spent years on, is the billing relationship, the ability to package different products and services into a single bill, the ability to settle financial products at the bill level and pay out different entities on the back end, right? Home energy services today are pretty disaggregated. Customers can choose retail energy. They can choose rooftop solar. They can choose community solar. They can do demand response. And there may be multiple different entities doing all these things. And so what we wanted to build was a single platform that understands the customer, where they live, how they use energy, and take all these point solutions and bring them into a single platform, a single experience for the consumer. And the next step of that is getting further into DER. So who we are today, we have customers in all 50 states. We manage a single bill for them when they connect their utility account. We look at their data, and then we cross-sell them clean and energy efficient services. And today that is buying credits or offsets from the market, community solar. We have a prepaid solar product. We've done some rooftop solar sales in the past. We are a broker in every competitive energy market. And then we do a lot of things around the utility experience that I don't think utilities do. So free credit card payments. I think there's like 2 utilities in America that allow you to pay by credit card without paying a fee. Choosing your own bill date. We're working on, you sign up for a utility, it's actually kind of arbitrary what day they decide to bill you. But for a lot of Americans, that really, really matters, right? Boosting your credit score. And eventually on our roadmap, it's wrapping all of the home utilities into a single experience, electric, water, and gas. You see a lot of companies doing this in the commercial space, actually. I mean, NG is a great example in their deal with Ohio State, where they went to Ohio State and said, hey, we'll give you, a flat power bill, but we'll manage everything that happens on campus: lighting, demand response, assets, a microgrid, et cetera, et cetera. There are real limitations to what you can do in a residential home compared to a campus, compared to the stuff I know Duncan works on, and especially what James is doing. But there's still a lot of value, and there's obviously more and more growing with more products that are being introduced. So what do customers actually want? So I think what we found was there's no love lost for the utility. People may have some trust because it's it's a brand they know, but it's not. We're talking about like NPSs either in the negative or on par with Comcast and Verizon. So there's just not an experience there that people appreciate. And this goes back to like some of the things that have nothing to do with energy, right? Like a digital experience, understanding my data, choosing my bill date, being able to pay by different methods, et cetera. So customers want simplicity. They want convenience around a thing that they may or may not actually fully understand. They want products and services that match the values, right? So the education barrier, if for one of you guys, and I see some names here that I recognize too, which is great, but if you're selling a commercial entity, there's a CFO and there might be a building manager, and there's like, they might have their own energy team, and they can understand what does demand response mean for us, et cetera. What does a PPA mean for us? For the residential user, there's so much education that has to happen that simplicity is something we're trying to build into our product. And, as an example, community solar is one where we've taken the sort of traditional community solar model, which looked a lot like rooftop solar, and stripped away long-term contracts. We stripped away credit checks. It's a ton of fun talking to banks and tax equity when you take away all the things that they understood for decades. But we made it stupidly simple to say, you can actually get a cheaper rate for power from a local clean energy project. Or in retail energy, which is a market that is incredibly opaque and confusing for residential customers, the ability to tell them, hey, we're on your side, we're your advocate, we'll only ever buy supply for you or broker you to a supplier if we can beat the utility price. So those, when I talk about simplicity, it's not just sort of the customer journey and experience, but also how we can engage a customer in those products. And again, products that match the customer's values. So whether that's clean energy broadly, having a smart home, being more efficient, and trying not to do the things utilities do, like hire actors to go to town hall meetings to support fossil fuels. There's a lot, for those of you that are thinking about residential or even commercial sales, I think helping folks understand those differentiation points are really important. We've also found that customers really do favor resiliency, especially in light of fires. And actually, there are quite a few outages in America, whether or not, utilities do an incredible job 99% of the time, but most folks actually experience an outage within the last few years in their home. And so resiliency is something that we're hoping to get into with more behind the meter DERs, but it is a value prop that I'm sure a lot of you who are in backup gen know exists. So what are the products that actually matter in the home? We really put them into 5 buckets. And I'll one of them that's not necessarily a product, but behavior. It's still something that can make a difference in a residential home that is very different than I think commercial, where you have sort of a set, business that needs to run. Batteries, thermostats and HVAC, EVs and L2 chargers, and water heaters, water heater switches. And when you put those in a hierarchy of like what's possible today, what's growing at a rate that'll make it really meaningful in the future, it looks like behavior is sort of tied closely to the smart thermostat, right? It is becoming more and more ubiquitous in homes. EVs and L2 chargers, which, this is going to be a really tough year for. I think pre-pandemic, a lot of you guys, it was going to be an amazing year. And I think the early data shows it is going to be a lot tougher. And, there's a ton to unpack from combining a level 2 charger with all the different ways to monetize on the grid. But, we see massive potential there. And we've actually, we've spent time with automakers on what does that look like? Can you wrap energy with a car lease all in one, fuel and car in a single lease? Can you, and this will come back to something I talk about later, but can you give a customer a flat bill for all of that and manage everything that happens in the background? Water heaters and water heater switches, I do think there's a ton of value there in multiple parts of the market. They are somewhat difficult to install, and I think there's a lot to still do there. And so those are, when we think about residential, those are the products that we're really thinking about now and into the future. And obviously thermostats and behavior is sort of the easiest, most scale, simplest for the consumer to try to install their own thermostat. And the last thing I'll say is like, how does all this stuff get monetized, right? And I think there's the basic that you guys are all familiar with, that sort of value stacking, shifting demand, right? If you're in a retail market where you can shift demand against a wholesale rate and maybe lower a cap tag. If you're not, and you have a time of use rate, be actually managing to that time of use rate. And then, ultimately with some of the larger items, things like frequency regulation and other sort of services for the utility or the grid on a larger scale. I think one of the really unique things about owning the billing relationship, and I talk about this often, that like energy efficiency today can really only be monetized in capacity markets or with the utility. If you own the bill, you can actually, for the first time, monetize energy efficiency at the individual level. And we're currently doing this in a few markets through subscriptions. So a customer comes to us, we understand their energy usage, we understand their historical usage, and then we sort of build these predictive models of what may happen in that home. We'll say James signs up and we slap $150 flat bill on him. That's my strike price. The onus is then on me, Arcadia, to actually lower James's overall cost, whether that's generation, his cap tag, whatever else we can monetize. We give the customer this amazing predictability. We may give them some smart home tech. We'll wrap it with clean energy, either through community solar or through RECs. But then the onus sort of goes away from the consumer and should be on us. And I think that's a really exciting, really powerful value prop that goes back to what I was explaining earlier, where like NG and sort of big corporates are working with third parties to sort of manage things for them. I think we can do that on the residential level. It's a lot of coordination. There's a lot of value that has to get stacked. That's where I think our platform shines, because it's not just making money in capacity. It's not just making money in load shifting. It's doing all these little things, and maybe even monetizing the rebate that the utility offers, right? So doing all the things is to bring that value to the consumer is what we're trying to do. Cool. So I just wanted to give that overview. We've built our platform across pretty much every major IOU in the country. We have customers in all 50 states. Obviously, markets are dramatically different in multiple places. I think I saw this recently from Abe from Amperon, that 60% of American residential smart meters do not settle to the meter. That's a scandal.
Can you explain what that means?
That was actually going to be, so this is going to, I guess, start the question. We're going to try and keep this as organized as possible, but we also want to nerd out. So also informal, but that was actually, Duncan and I were going to start with like 2 to 5 questions that we already have kind of in the pipeline, and then kind of start taking more from the chat and kind of community. But that was like our first question. It's something you and I have talked about a lot, is this concept of settling to the meter. I actually learned that from you, because in commercial, you're more likely to have that. But can you just kind of first like explain that concept, and then maybe a level deeper, like why it's such a scandal, and how big of a barrier it creates in doing a lot of things that we want to do with DERs, kind of, in the macro sense, I guess.
Totally. So I will say, for those of you that are on this call that may be involved in policy, I think there's a few, if someone on my team calls them Archimedes levers, these like little changes that would just have dramatic, widespread effect. And this is definitely one of them. So as James mentioned, anywhere that has a smart meter, usually on the commercial and industrial side, whether the market operates in 15-minute intervals or what have you, you can actually down to the meter buy power at that rate in that moment. That does not exist in, again, the majority of residential smart meter markets. So what that means is, if it is right now $2.30 and the price of power in PJM's like 3 cents, could I actually purchase power at 3 cents? And if I could I basically have a strategy around buying power in that increment? That may not be the best explanation, and James, you can certainly jump in here too, but that is not the way it operates, for example, in New York with residential customers. And so when you think about the compact and like this, the fact that utilities went to commissions and said, taxpayers pay for this massive upgrade, commercial entities are seeing a ton of that value. Residential customers, the majority of them, and not in every market, are not getting any of the value of demand shifting and to actually benefit the grid in terms of buying low, right?
Yeah. So I think you did do a good job of explaining it, but like almost just to take it a step further to get to like the why, which I think is what matters here, is, so I get why, in the past when we had analog meters, you need to send someone out to like look at the the clock basically and write down how much power had been used. And you're not going to do that every day or every hour. So you do it at the end of the month or whatever it is. So the utility would create for classes of customers load curves. Like your curve during the day is like this. So our exposure to the wholesale market on 15-minute intervals, we're kind of lumping all these customers. They all get the same curve, but then their consumption within that demand curve can go up or down. So what's happened is now we've put in the smart meters. So we actually have the data for what that real curve is, but the utility hasn't switched those customers to actually settle to that now real curve. It still settles to the curve they essentially hand you. So us and like our efforts to build a retail electricity provider that accounts for flexible demand, what it means is we could be seeing a smart meter reading at 2 p.m. The prices are spiking. We have a battery on site. We turn that battery on, the load, the load goes down. We've changed that curve in real time. But at the end of the month, the utility is going to hand us their curve and say like, that action didn't matter actually.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, is there a reason why? Because that's like what I don't understand still, because it's so obvious. If you want to get into like flexible demand to integrate more variable renewables, which is like the whole point of flexibility, like it's such an obvious alignment. The goal is so obviously aligned. Like, we need to do it. Like, what? So why haven't we done it?
I mean, it honestly, it goes back to episode 1 around franchise rights, and I think the control that the utility has by just throwing a flat load curve that doesn't allow, right, any of the devices or companies like us or Sunruns or Teslas or Nest to actually settle. And I'll just piggyback on James's point, like so yes, in certain markets, every home looks the same. There is actually the one thing that you can affect is the cap tag. Yeah. So to sort of break this down, there's your generation component, there's your peak, your capacity tag, transmission and distribution tags, especially in competitive markets that make up the costing structure. And you don't actually, so giving everyone that flat load curve just makes everyone look the same. It makes DERs essentially useless. There is, however, I think within our business model, the ability to set a strike price and just monetize energy efficiency still exists. But to actually like shift your demand or recool your things like that, you need every home to have its unique load curve. Because, our data will show, like, and COVID's thrown it all for a mess, but what does a home look like, a McMansion where there might be some stay-at-home folks that are not working during the day versus James, who's Bitcoin mining all day versus someone else, right? And this is, it's an incredibly important feature to actually monetize residential DER. So that lever, how do you change it? It's through the commissions, I think, ultimately. And I know Maryland is actually, there's been some retailers that have gotten together and talked about this within Maryland. We are approaching the commission in New York. This is just one of there's probably people smarter than me on this in this Zoom who know sort of what it would take to get the utility to do it. But frankly, the same companies, Itron, Landis, like all the folks that are doing the smart metering, they've done this, right, in either other markets or for different meters they have out there. So presumably it is on the utility ultimately, and I think the regulator can force them to.
So it sounds like it's a little more than like the lag, the difficulty in changing over technical infrastructure. There may be a bit of utility dragging their feet, and we need some regulatory pressure on them. Is that?
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things too, where it's like, until there's like a mass of, and smart thermostats are leading the way, but with more and more EVs, right? And frankly, more companies who manage these DERs actually coming to the commission and saying, hey, I can save these customers money. I can provide them better service. Those arguments are the ones that win over, because like at the end of the day, consumers don't care. There's no consumer that's going to go talk to a regulator and say, I want to settle the meter. It's going to be me. It's going to be Ecobee. It's going to be Nest. It's going to be Tesla. So yeah.
What do you think of the middle ground? I think in Illinois, like ComEd and Ameren, where there's a sort of hourly pricing program and it's opt-in, and then in theory, like service providers could use that option to deliver some kind of new service. Does that work, or is it a middle ground that isn't far enough?
No, I think it's like the utility holding on last of what they have. No, I think it's great. I think there was an amazing study by Brattle on ComEd TOU rates that 98% of customers, if on just the wholesale rate, right,
would save money.
And that's obvious, but like, it's just an amazing number and thing to say. And then, we actually specifically looked at ComEd recently. Our team looked at, okay, so everyone can save money against what they would have paid. But if you actually had a controllable asset, what is the extent of what you could save? And it was hundreds of dollars, right? And if you had there's an amazing, we have an incredible data team, and there's a gentleman on our team who's sort of focused on EVs and L2 chargers. And we found that within some of the TOU rates available in San Diego, I believe SRP, you're talking about like close to $1,000+ a year that a customer could save if the two are managed right. I think this is James's whole business model.
I'm not going to say too much. I'll say we've done the math, and we think enough to build a business on. So I guess it's significant. But yeah, I wanted to pull out like one or two more things from.
I would also say, sorry, just one thing.
Yeah,
on it, like, I firmly believe that a company needs to manage this for the consumer. Like, exposing a consumer to wholesale power rates is interesting for the engaged consumer and for the consumer with the DER. But for the average consumer, ComEd is one example. But you can see this in Texas, where it's like people, they may save over a 12-month period, but in any given month, they may lose their shirt. And frankly, a lot of Americans live month to month, right? Paycheck to paycheck. So there's a lot of this comes to also the role of the third-party manager aggregator in making it work for the consumer.
That was actually like my next question. I'm going to ask one or two more, and then we have a whole, some others to get through and in the chat, but I'm curious, because it actually honestly took me a while to put together the power of like owning the billing interface and how much you can actually do from that. So on that note of like being the third party manager and kind of these, even talking about settling to the meter and a lot of the changes that need to happen, what do you think? There's a big question, but what does the grid look like in 10 years? And what is Arcadia's actual role within that, right? Like, when you kind of came up with the idea of a billing interface, did you always see that down the road, or are things kind of the vision for it constantly evolving? Because I think it gets into the point you just mentioned about this more like macro role for third-party companies and energy managers and their relationships with the consumers.
Yeah, it's a big question, but look, I think the Texas market is actually like and some foreign markets are actually in a world of DERs that where you can provide consumers different services that they may want, especially around their transportation or around their home. Different, I think the Texas model is actually the model of where we should go. There's going to be a lot of utility opposition to that, right? I think but if I were a utility CEO even in a vertically regulated market, like, I would be thinking more about my business as a platform. And there's an amazing, immense value in having data and wires. I do think being the bill, like something unique that we do is in being the bill manager allows you to create new structures like subscription billing, right? Putting the risk on us, right? Rather than the consumer to manage this stuff. Doing different like finance structures through the bill, right? Commingling your payments. Excuse me. This is something like to get tax equity and debt comfortable with community solar. It's not this like random receipt that the customer gets in the mail. It's all commingled with your utility bill. And that's important for like underwriting purposes. But I see it as like there should be a lot of third-party managers that are all competing to provide the end consumer a better home energy service or home service. And the wires they will be there, right? They will always be a part of the grid, even with massive DER installations. And I think the utility should be thinking more of a business model around wires, access, and data. And like no utility is going to agree with me on that. So
that's awesome. I think I'm going to hand it back to Duncan now, who can maybe, I thought we'd just get the conversation going, but Duncan, you have a list of questions, I think, from the community. It seems like there's some popping up in the chat too. So however you want to do it.
Yeah, we have some that were sent in to us, like on Twitter and email. So I'll get to a couple of those, and then we can jump into those into the chat so that we can actually call on people and let them ask the questions. One that I thought was kind of interesting, it's a little bit backtracking, but one question that was raised is, what was the original business model when you started Arcadia? Was there a specific market you were targeting and you developed the platform from there? Or did you on day one try to make it work within many different platforms?
I get asked this question a lot, and I'm not really sure why. So what I'm describing to you now was a lot of, who knew when we were going to get there? But I knew like understanding a customer's historical energy data was important, and then owning the bill was incredibly important. The first thing we sold were renewable energy certificates because it was easy. And it was actually a differentiated product in like 38 states in the US that didn't have competitive energy markets. The core idea of like, building a brand, going direct to consumer, understanding their data, and then acting as a marketplace and a platform to cross-sell. We didn't ever want to develop projects. I didn't ever want to own assets. I didn't want to take risk in the market. That was sort of always there from the beginning. It's just, you can't this is a ridiculous analogy, but like, I really doubt Uber was thinking about Uber Eats, like when they started. But maybe they were thinking about transportation as like, all the things it could enable, right? Logistics. I think Uber has like a shipping business. I'm not saying we've figured out like exactly all the things we can monetize. Like that is evolving. If you had asked me 4.5, 5 years ago about water heater switches, like I don't think I knew anything about them. So I think what's exciting about the business is if I were working at a utility, what I think would be really exciting about that is you have a customer, you have data, and you own the bill. And so, you can sort of run wild with all the things all the services you can wrap into it. But when we started the business, it was much more broader about, what are the things the utility is not doing that they should be doing for the consumer, and what do we need to try to deliver those services, and that was billing and data.
I think the Uber example is actually a really interesting comparison. Like, it sounds like Arcadia realized there was a need for, to develop the underlying infrastructure of the customer relationship, the data, and the billing. And from there, given the energy markets are very sort of diffuse, you can layer in different things that address different problems. Actually, similarly to Uber, right? They realized there was a need to be able to have the digital infrastructure to connect supply and demand for transportation, but that can be people, that can be food, that can be freight. That's pretty interesting, and it answered the next question I was going to ask, which is one of our Twitter questions was how you think about developing an energy business when the U.S. is not one market. There's 50 markets in the U.S. and maybe 50 times every utility within each state, and this seems to be kind of unique compared to most consumer-facing businesses in the U.S.
Hey, I'm sorry, Ducky. Maybe it's my internet. Can you just repeat that last part real quick?
Sure. So one of the questions asked was how an energy entrepreneur thinks about the fact that our markets are so fragmented, right?
Yeah.
There's not one U.S. market. There's 50, and really within each state there's another 10, depending on how many utilities there are. How do you most the attraction in startups to most consumer businesses is like it's a big market, right? And we can scale. How do you think about that in the energy space?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is it sucks. It's really tough, right? Like I'm sure a lot of you guys have to pick like specific utilities, specific markets. So early on, we made the decision to offer a nationwide service because it was incredibly differentiated. We knew you couldn't do everything in everywhere, right? Like, I mean, I'm here in DC, and we have a competitive market in community solar and TOU rate. Virginia has none of that. But I also think like this service, right, that is managing for the consumer should not just be commodity. It should be like there are other services, right? And so ultimately, we do look at our business on a utility by utility basis when it comes to like basic, like where are we acquiring customer or spending more or spending less to acquire, et cetera. It's difficult, but I also think it's really valuable. Like one of the really unique things about our platform is if you live in DC and you move to Oklahoma, you can move with us, right? We may not be able to get you the same products in Oklahoma, but we'll still own a relationship, and hopefully over time we'll have more products. So I think that's like a really unique value prop of being like a 50-state solution. But no, it's really tough. And that's where the analogy with, I think, other marketplaces falls and breaks, is that like we have like this balkanized energy market. I think, I do think it's kind of sad too that like the wholesale market competition or retail energy competition sort of stopped, and there's really nobody, even the big companies, like sort of stopped fighting for it. I know Arizona and Virginia, there's still a movement. It was briefly spoken about in California, but I think access to those markets makes a huge difference. And yeah, it's not a great answer because it's not easy, but I do think specifically for resi, because people do move, and you can sell non-commodity services, that it was meaningful for us to build 50 states.
Cool. Awesome. No, I think that's a great answer. I'm going to move on to some questions in the chat then, just to make sure we have enough time. The first question was from Sean Grimes at the very beginning of the chat. Sean, do you want to jump in and ask? I can recite it for you, but if you'd like to use your own words, now's the time.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Sweet. Yeah, Kiran, you were talking about the list of DERs that you guys see as being pretty applicable for you guys going forward. Can you talk about kind of how do you see yourselves helping customers get those DERs in the first place, if at all, and then maybe contrast that to how you think about community solar today, which is kind of fully virtualized? Just like, are you driving the actual deployment of these assets, or are you just integrating the ones that are already there?
Part of this business model is not financing and not developing projects. There's certainly a path we could have taken to do that, but specifically decided not to. So community solar is a good example, and I can talk about sort of some of the things we're thinking about DRs. so we go to developers and we say, hey, we either have customers or we can go get customers. And for the customers we acquire, here's some payment history and capacity data. So we know that Kiran needs 4 kW, but Sean needs 9 to subscribe for, and paid their bills, so that there's like an underwriting function, so we can use that data to our advantage. But obviously there's tax equity, there's debt, there's an asset owner. They're paying us for basically O&M, right? Bring offtake and manage it over time. The same thing, I think we would structure it. This is for another time, and I'm happy to talk about sort of why we decided to do that and not actually try to be the developer. But I think the same would apply for like getting an EV charger into the home or a battery, even a thermostat. Is there are a lot of infra investors who would love to finance DERs, especially if they're wrapped with all this other value. And so we may be giving up some value in doing that, but I don't have to take any of the risk, right? I don't need a massive balance sheet to do that. And you see that in energy often. So we can just project finance a lot of this. We bring a lot of data to the table, and then we sort of can manage it all. But that is sort of the path that we're looking at, and the path we've taken with community solar. But there's large IPPs that do this with commercial clients, where they want to finance and manage and do everything.
So like, just to clarify, if I'm a customer that wants, I guess, a water heater switch, then I might come to Arcadia, and you guys might have a partner network that I could look at, but less so about you physically sending an Arcadia, somebody in a polo shirt into my house and putting it together.
Yeah. So I don't think we've had this all figured out yet, but there's definitely, so we definitely want to work with a whole host of partners, right? So, we're talking to a lot of different EV charging companies. So we want to be sort of device agnostic in some ways. We might say, hey, one's better than the other in a certain vertical, but so allow multiple devices to integrate, finance it with a third party, and then figure out either in a local installer or some network to install it. I don't think, at least that's where our head's at right now.
Cool, thanks.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute there.
These comments are great. Someone says, as a European, I find the US electricity market utterly baffling. I would agree.
Amen to that. Yeah.
So we had another early question in the chat from Sierra Peterson. Sierra, do you want to jump on?
Hey. Good morning. Hey. Question for you. How do you work with an emerging platform like Leap?
So we, I'll be very honest, I'm not totally, like I've heard of Leap, and I think it's actually very similar to a company I helped co-found years ago that was basically selling energy efficiency into capacity markets. If Leap is taking a position in the market, we could, in a capacity market, then we could sort of help them fulfill that obligation. Again, I also don't want to take a position in the market. We can just sleeve that through someone that wants to do that, whether it's Leap or whether it's like a massive IPP. So I think that's how. I know we also, I think there's a lot of companies. I mean, Leap's not the only one. There's a bunch of companies that are thinking about, how do you aggregate DERs, right? And I think we want to focus very clearly on not just the market mechanism, but actually like making that part of managing the whole home experience. So I think that would be that would be one way we do it, is they have a position and we could work with them to fulfill it.
Cool. All right. So Erwin, you had a question about, and I don't quite understand it, so you definitely need to be the one to ask it. Hardware islanding issues impacting liquidity for wholesale markets at residential end. What was that?
Right. Yeah, no, I'm kind of looking at where we are with two pieces, sort of policy pieces, franchise as sort of barriers to distributed energy, but I'm also looking at just the technology piece here as well, and just the distribution system and how it was designed out and built out, and how it's sort of being upgraded. So the utility went from kind of a net metering, took a back step to net billing. We don't have smart meters yet. At the residential side, we just have it sort of on the commercial side, and the implementation is slow. So again, I'm actually wanting to sort of fast forward the opportunities here, look at other jurisdictions and say, well, it's not about net metering or net billing or even time of use. It's about the value at the point of consumption, almost like a wholesale price there. But I just need to see jurisdictions and understand how we get there. Does that make sense? So I'm really looking for areas where the hardware and the policy contribute to enabling sort of wholesale markets at the residential end of things. Yeah.
I mean, I think so. In Philadelphia, if you have a smart meter, you can settle to the meter, and you can, you can really monetize load shifting of DERs in a significant way. I think this is hard to maybe wrap your head around, but like I don't think I've fully been able to articulate it well to folks, but the subscription concept, right? The flat bill concept, you can do for example, in the Midwest where there's just a TOU rate and basically there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen, but there's a way to monetize a battery. And we've done some of this math in markets where, you may not think were possible by setting a strike price for the consumer, putting them on a certain TOU rate, and then basically shifting their peak energy use at different times. And so that's where I think our platform can do some creative stuff. But, I think to your question about there's also some stuff FERC could do to make this easier, broader. But, there are markets, like it's not everywhere. There are markets where residential meters do settle, where you can pass through a wholesale price and sort of arbitrage that.
Okay.
All right, looking through the chat, trying to select some good ones here. I'm going to sort of combine a couple into one master question. There's some talk in the chat about services like in Texas where, it exposes residential end users to indexed rates. And you had mentioned earlier yourself that, looking over the long term, this perhaps saves customers money, but it presents the problem of that one really bad month where your bill is 5x what you thought it was going to be, and you're not prepared for that. Something I've wondered is, one way to fix that certainly is to have an aggregator sort of take on that risk and sort of do what they need to do to make sure that pricing is fixed. Another way to deal with it is just to let customers, when they get a big bill, pay it slowly. So, give them repayment terms that are more reasonable. which is something we do outside of indexed rates anyway. If you have just a huge bill one winter month because your resistance electric heating kicked in, often utilities will let you pay it over 3 months rather than one. And I'm assuming the working capital utilities need for that is pretty cheap, right? This isn't high cost of capital stuff. Is that an option? Like, can we put everyone on an indexed rate? This is my crazy idea for the day. Put everybody on an indexed rate, and then just like that one time a month you get a huge bill. Like, yeah, you could just chip away at it over the next 4 months.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a ton of stuff you can do, right? And I think the gritty model it's interesting for a whole bunch of reasons, but I think, a lot of customers last summer got hurt, right? And so what can you do? To your point, you can extend payments out. Now there's obviously some payment risk, and you still have to buy the power and figure that out. So there's some stuff you can do there. Connecting that wholesale power to a DER, right, of some sort, even a smart thermostat, can actually make a huge difference. And then that smart thermostat becomes like a tradable entity in ERCOT and adds more value. And so I actually think Gritty, Evolve, there's a few others I think that are looking at wholesale pass-through. It works well because you don't have to like over-educate the consumer and have them look at an app every 15 minutes, but just have their thermostat connected to pre-cool or what have you. So you could, and then this is where subscription billing I think works with the psychology of a user who's low information or doesn't know that prices basically are like this, right? Is that you just give them the subscription, and they will save like over a 12-month period, and that actually is a way to sort of smooth out the payments, similar to what you're saying. I mean, there also might be a way to like cap a fixed price with hedge a fixed price for a few months. I personally think there's just a ton of innovation there that needs to happen, right? But the ability to actually pass it through for the first time, like I think Gritty doing that was fascinating, and there's just a lot more work to do to make that work for the consumer. I've heard stories of like commercial clients in Texas who've been exposed to index for a long time because they had CHP or they had some backup gen, and they would just arb it like 3 times a year, and it made sense. And so it's a good start for Resi. Now that we have devices and data, there's a lot more to do.
I have a question to piggyback off that. We've seen like the energy as a service or subscription model concept kind of float around more in academic circles. I think some people have tried it. I don't know the extent that you are now, but it seems to be like probably on a grander scale than has been tried before. So you'd be a great person to ask. Like my kind of limited perspective of it was, retailers are already taking on commodity risk, but by adding, by capping, having a subscription, they're now taking on, in a way, consumption risk. That can be a great way to align incentives. But the pitfalls I see with it is that essentially that means that you need outs. So like the contract can never really be founded in on trust. Like in one direction, they're paying a flat fee, and now I'm incentivized to drive that load down. But like if the teenager starts mining Bitcoin, which is always a fun example, you need to be like, wait, that's not the load profile we signed up for, and now you're consuming too much, and we got to change the rate. So like it does incentivize the retailer to take action like more as a service and in favor of efficiency goals and DERs and all that good stuff. But on the other hand, like the customer is now no longer incentivized to be efficient, I guess. So is that like am I right in identifying that as a problem? One, and two, is it overcomable? If so, like, what's your kind of perspective on I'll
say a couple of things.
How's consumer behavior going to change, I guess?
Yeah. So I think everyone here is interested in more DERs being out in the world. And I'm sorry, but like nobody's going to understand this shit, right? It is like way too complicated to understand why you should install this DER and then ARB this price. And so commercial is different. Commercials are different. So in the residential world, there's, you know, retailers have traditionally hedged price and then not volumes on the consumer. So in this model, you are hedging price and volume. But if you have a DER, you have a volumetric hedge behind the meter, right? It's the way to I think about it. So you can maybe hedge price, and then you have a volumetric hedge behind the meter that you're managing. I think so. You mentioned like the outs and like what needs to exist. Well, there's one way to think about like you're going to have a portfolio. So we have thousands of customers on flat bills today. We have one customer who switched from wood heating to electric heating, and she called us and she was very upset, and she knew what she was doing to us. And when you look at a distribution, there's going to be this like weird tale of, hey, I'm Bitcoin mining, I'm growing pot, I switched from gas to electric heating or wood to electric, et cetera. So you need to take it as a portfolio. But also, like, if you look around, I mean, in a lot of these papers, they try to look at this, like your health insurance has a copay, and then there's like something above it. Your old cell phone plans before cell data became, you know, meaninglessly, you know, not expensive, had caps, and then there was like a volumetric price above it. I think in general, what we found with our data, broadly across 50 states, when you normalize for weather and type of home, people live within, it's not Netflix. You don't gouge on it once you get a subscription. You live your life comfortably, depending on what kind of economic band you're in. You live your life comfortably, and there may be some big changes every now and then, but that's part of this big portfolio that you manage. The beauty of flat bill is the customer conversion, I think, goes up dramatically because it's a simpler thing to understand, and the ability to monetize energy efficiency if you can, right? But you got to think about these things on a portfolio basis. I think if you're selling like 10 commercial customers and one blows like or adds a whole new data center or something, like it's very different than like, you know, 100,000 residential homes that can be sort of managed. So here, I'll leave you guys with this because I have to run. We don't have this figured out yet. Like we're running a bunch of tests. Like we're trying to look at new DERs. We've got a team looking at all the data that James you're describing, and about, you know, how people react once they're on subscription. Does it change? We actually found that immediately there may be a small change, and then people go right back to what they were doing before. And so Resi is a very different behavior than probably what most of you guys deal with.
The cell phone plan is a great example. I actually hadn't thought of. I was more thinking of like consumer behavior and how they'd react to moving, you know, upping fees and stuff like that. But there is precedent. So that's a great point.
Yeah, there's some great, I mean, on the opposite side of that, there's some great stories of folks who signed up for Griddy in Texas and hooked up their Bitcoin mine to operate whenever prices were like under a penny.
Nice.
So there are people that will want to engage on that level too.
I have actually a personal example of something like that. Con Edison has been unable to read my meter for 8 years for some reason. So they just charge me whatever the last person lived here each month. And so I started growing plants indoors, not pot, but growing plants indoors because I basically have zero marginal cost of electricity. But that might be just because I'm interested in these things. That might not be normal residential behavior.
I love it. I got to run, guys. If anybody wants to reach out to me, it's just Kiran@arcadia.com. Thanks for doing this, guys. This is awesome. I'm going to start joining every month.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kiran.
For taking the time, man. This was great.
See you all. Bye.
Bye.
I see we have some questions remaining from folks that were pretty interesting. Maybe we want to pull some of them together and try to get answers and post them to the website later.
Yeah, I dig that.
Cool. Well, it's a New York City apartment.
I'm going over to Duncan's and plugging a Bitcoin mining ring in in his closet. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, right now I just have some tomato seedlings, which is a pretty low value way to utilize this sweet deal I have.
Complete waste.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, we'll keep track of the extra questions. I think there's a few back here that are really good. We'll try to get answers out to everybody.
Make sure to say, can you see the I just did. So
you did? Okay. Awesome. My dog is freaking out. He wants to go outside, so I'm gonna jump.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
hey,
see everybody.
Great to meet you, man. Keep fighting the good fight up in Saskatchewan. I'm sure we'll get there.
You're on mute.
There you go. No, thanks, guys. And I'm following the podcasts. I'm kind of hearing the conversations. All good stuff. And Saskatchewan is shaped like a box, literally. And I'm thinking outside the box.
There you go. That's great.
Yeah. So no, the more I hear and the more I hear what's going on elsewhere, it's all good here. So thanks.
Start a DER task force contingent in Saskatchewan. Maybe round up a few others. Try and get them on the bandwagon.
Yeah, for sure. The
nice.
coalition of the willing.
Yeah,
exactly. So, okay.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right,
everyone. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.